This government spent $1 billion on companies that turned around and gave $5 billion in dividends to their shareholders.
The NDP hammered the Liberal government over the lack of transparency and corporate favors given out during this pandemic. Now, I have a couple clips here to show you. The first one is going to be NDP leader Jagmeet Singh going after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the approach they've taken to long-term care.
This government spent $1 billion on companies that turned around and gave $5 billion in dividends to their shareholders. Two of those were long-term care homes, which had some of the worst conditions for residents and seniors. Why didn't the Liberal government make sure that all public money was going to protect vulnerable seniors and residents of those long-term care homes?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président, le député.
Mr. Speaker, the member referred to artists, and yes, indeed, as a government, we have acknowledged how hard our artists and creators have been hit by this pandemic with a lack of audiences to share their work with, their art with, and that is why, in addition to the CERB, we've provided hundreds of millions of dollars in additional support for them, and we will remain there throughout this pandemic so that we can all celebrate together at the end of the pandemic.
All right. Now, as you can see there, Justin Trudeau didn't even acknowledge the long-term care home aspect of that question. You have here a system in Canada where, sure, there is a basic level of healthcare guaranteed to everyone, but there are massive holes in the system. For example, dental care. Another major example, long-term care. Why is long-term care covered by private companies? Why are people making profits off of long-term care? And you're seeing the destruction that is caused and where that money has gone. So Jagmeet Singh tweeted out, months ago, we demanded the Trudeau government put conditions on money to big corporations to make sure it didn't go to paying shareholders. They said no. This is the result. More money for shareholders, less money for the safe care of our loved ones. And he is quote tweeting this CBC News tweet saying 2 long-term care companies have received more than $157 million in COVID-19 relief from the federal government and Ontario governments, while also paying tens of millions of dollars in dividends to shareholders. And a little more detail on that from CBC. Extended Care Inc. and Sienna Senior Living Inc. have paid a combined total of $74 million in dividends this year. Meanwhile, more than 480 residents and staff have died of COVID-19 at the company's care homes in Ontario. So just a note on that. My understanding is that Extended Care is a national company. I'm not sure why they're just focused on deaths in Ontario. But apart from that, the real issue here is why isn't long-term care nationalized? Why do we have private companies in this space at all? You wouldn't have this misuse of funds. You wouldn't have these people making money off of this COVID relief if these companies or if this industry was public, was nationalized. So ultimately, that's the problem here. Now, let me get to the next clip. This is going to be NDP MP Peter Julian hammering Chrystia Freeland over the lack of transparency for where a lot of this money is going.
Canadians are really struggling. A lot of them are struggling to keep a roof over their head, and a lot of them just trying to keep their small businesses going. So it's very disturbing to find out from journalists who've been investigating some of the distribution of COVID relief that dozens of large Canadian companies have been using COVID funds to issue dividends, engage in stock buybacks, and even given executive bonuses. And my question is very simple. How many companies have engaged in these practices, and what is the total amount of what they have received?
The wage subsidy can, by very clear and specific design, only be used to pay employees. That money cannot be used for any other purpose.
My question is, what are you going to do about these practices that clearly contravene what Canadians would see as an appropriate use of COVID funds? And why is the government stonewalling on getting this information to the Canadian public?
The wage subsidy must be used to pay workers. That is Very, very clear, and we expect companies to comply with that.
Now, the issue here is that the Liberal government is not being transparent about how that money is being used. But of course, the issue is that they are handing this money to private companies, and they can't exactly go into their books and see where that money is going. But when you're seeing stock buybacks or executive bonuses, it's clear that a lot of this money isn't simply going to the employees at these companies. It's actually benefiting the people at the top, which is why the entire approach to how this money was given out is ultimately the issue here. But just a bit of info here from CBC. Among the revelations by CBC News has been that the CEO of an Indigenous tourism group charged with distributing federal government COVID-19 funding to Indigenous tourism businesses received a $25,000 bonus. On Monday, the Financial Post reported that at least 68 publicly traded companies paid millions in dividends while receiving federal wage subsidies. So this is the issue with handing money over to large companies. You can say it's for paying the wages of their employees, but ultimately you can't really go into their books and know that for sure. So you had a much different approach when it came to, say, Germany, for example, where they covered up to 87% of your paycheck, and that money went directly to the actual workers, so that there was complete transparency about where that money was going. It wasn't being handed to massive corporations and then, it trickled down. No, it was being given to the actual employees. They were covering the paychecks. So that would be the actual way to hand out COVID relief and ensure that it is going to these people. But when you're handing, wads of cash to massive companies, you can't exactly go into their books and see where that money is going, which is exactly why the approach of handing giant wads of cash to massive companies is just the wrong approach to begin with. You actually have to serve the people and give the money directly to them.